After it was formed in 1921, the LMS decided to continue using the Midland Railway's small engine policy. The idea was to primarily use smaller locomotives, as the railway had no need for bigger, heavier engines that would be wasted pulling smaller loads. And when the railway did need a long or heavy train moving, they could simply couple up two engines together to move it. As a result, many coal trains were double-headed by 060 engines. Because of the number of branch lines and how frequently bigger trains would be split up, this policy made sense on the Midland Railway, but eventually the much bigger LMS realised that this was uneconomical. Realising that they needed some bigger engines, the LMS decided what they needed were a few Garratts. Bayer, Peacock & Company were a locomotive works in the UK that built locomotives for underground use, but later became renowned for their Bayer Garratt designs. Put simply, these were two steam locomotives that were fused together. Take the frames, wheels and cylinders from one engine, back them up to another set and attach the two together with a boiler on an articulated frame. Boom! Now you have the power of two engines while only needing the crew of one. Bayer, Peacock & Company mostly built and exported these engines for use in Africa, Australia and Asia. Despite the company being based in England, few UK railways actually used Garratt locomotives. Given how much the LMS operated trains by double-heading them, it made sense that they'd want these two-in-one engines. 3 were built in 1927, with specific changes requested by the LMS, and after testing, another 30 were built in 1930. They were put to work on coal trains, running between South Yorkshire and London. These engines were by no means fast, mostly travelling at speeds of 25 miles an hour, but they possessed a high tractive effort and were equipped to do the work they were built for. All of the Garratts were initially built with straight-sided bunkers. However, from 1931, all but 2 were modified and fitted with special revolving coal bunkers. 2 small cylinders would rotate the bunker, helping to trim the coal and reduce the amount of coal dust blowing into the cab. Unfortunately, the bunkers did little to prevent coal dust from blowing in when being driven bunker first, making the engines somewhat unpopular with footplate crews. Another issue the engines had was some of the design features the LMS insisted on having, such as their standard axle boxes. These axle boxes were barely fit for use on the 4Fs built a few years prior to the Garratts, never mind engines that were much heavier. As a result, their axle boxes frequently ran hot, requiring more frequent maintenance. On top of this, other parts of the design required frequent maintenance. However, some have put this down to the quality of white metal and oil use as opposed to simply being poorly built. Braking also proved to be awkward. All of the Garratts were fitted with air brakes, however many goods wagons for a long time weren't, and as a result put a significant amount of strain on the engine's brakes when going downhill. During a Garratt's early run, when inspected at Heaton Mersey while pulling a goods train, it was found that all of the engine's brake blocks had melted. The Garratts continued their work until the 1950s, pulling other kinds of goods besides coal and even being trialled on passenger services. Despite their impressive power, they never really stood out in terms of performance. Coupled with their heavy coal consumption and frequent need for maintenance, it's no surprise that the LMS decided to pursue other engine designs, with the Garratt ending up falling into the awkward niche of being too good to scrap but not good enough to replicate. They weren't outright replaced until the introduction of British Rail's 9Fs in 1954, which didn't quite match the power of the Garratts, but made up for it with higher speeds. The last Garratt was taken out of service in 1958. Overall, the LMS's Garratts were certainly impressive to look at, but unfortunately weren't quite the 2-for-1 powerhouses the LMS needed. Their awkward size, combined with other glaring issues in their design, made them somewhat of a white elephant compared to some of the more refined designs the LMS would produce merely a few years later. The fact that most Garratts were built for use on foreign rails and had a history of working reliably tells us then that perhaps where you are built isn't always where you'll be the most useful. Subscribe for more.